Hello, adventurer. It's good to see you. You have made it to the morning grind.
Welcome, welcome.
It's the live stream at the beginning of the Geekverse, where we talk about all types of topics in geekdom, gaming, and fantasy, with an emphasis on being constructive and creating the things that we want to exist in the world.
It's all on the grind, Sizemore. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
That's exactly right. There are a lot of adventures to be had today. Dungeons to explore and monsters to slay, and who knows what a random encounter might send our way. That's why we have to prepare, so settle in now for the morning grind with your favorite beverage in hand.
Tea? Or maybe something a little stronger. I've got a few bottles of the old Wynyard left.
Whatever you want. Pull up a chair.
Dude.
If you're feeling fancy, how about a cappuccino? Or a frappuccino? Or how about an espresso?
Just tea, thank you.
Sounds good to me, Gandalf. Whatever you want. I'm just glad you're here.
Everyone is welcome. You can just watch if you want. You don't have to worship anything you don't want to worship.
Thank you, Mike. But be forewarned.
Sometimes we get really strange characters around here.
Wait, what's that you say? Why can't you come and be a part of the stream?
My wife would disown me.
Oh no, I bet she'll be fine with it. Come on in.
Am I scared for my safety? No.
What are we supposed to do?
Everybody do the secret handshake.
Secret cultist handshake.
Oh, now do wizards who love each other.
It's my friend is a science.
I still don't have gifts, but it's fine.
It's all on the grind, son. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
Dude, this would be a sick place to bring the band.
Indeed it would be, Dave. It really would. I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome. Glad to have you here. Oh, look, here's someone new.
Is this the cultist meetup?
Yes it is.
Come to hang out? Please accept me. I have nothing else.
Okay, we accept you. Everyone's welcome here.
Brought some snacks.
Well, that makes things even better.
You want some coffee? I don't drink coffee. You sure? It's cultist coffee. What makes it cultist coffee? I'm a cultist and I'm drinking it. Oh. Then I'll have some.
What exactly is going on here?
I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome. It's so great to have you. Oh, and look, here comes another stranger.
Can we help you?
Yes, fellow cultists. I could really use some food.
Oh yeah? Welcome. We have donuts.
Oh, it's me. I'm glad I'm here. I'm sure you have a few questions for me, though.
What's your name? Who do you work for? What god do you worship?
Great questions, Rob.
I'm Steve King, and I worship Nyarlathotep.
No, not really. I'm just Heath, and I won't be worshiping anything this morning. But I will be your host. Welcome to the office. We're going to have a great time. I've got my coffee ready, because now it's time for the morning grind.
If you could become a fish, that would be amazing. Then I could command you with my mental fish powers.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Good morning. I am Heath. Welcome to the office. Welcome to my home, and welcome to the morning grind. Today, we have a special show today. We're going to be talking about this book, Stomping Kittens, by Adron J. Smitley, which was donated to all of us here by the author on the morning grind. I just put a link. I just put a link in the comments right there. The author was kind enough to turn it free for us, and so for the Kindle edition. So I've got a free copy of it here, and everybody can get a free copy as well. So in advance of NaNoWriMo, we've been talking a little bit about story coming up here because we got NaNoWriMo in just a few short days. So if you're looking for some additional information that might help structure your story as you plot out the structure of your story in advance of NaNoWriMo, well, this would be this could be a great one to do because it is free. So we really appreciate that very much. Yes, thank you very much. That is Phaser Wrist is the author's nephew, I believe. And so, yes. So he was the one who connected us. So that's fantastic. Thank you. Phaser Wrist, would you please let him know that we're live here if he wants to or is able to join the chat, or he can watch the replay later or whatever. If you would let him know, I looked to see if I could find a social media profile for him briefly before this started, but I didn't know exactly where to send things. So if you can contact him, let him know that we really appreciate all of that, and we're going to be taking a look at his book here in just a few minutes. Let's see. So yesterday I did repost my first one-on-one interview with Cameron back on the Table Talk YouTube channel. Let's see. And I was thinking about it. We talked about biblical storytelling.
Welcome to Table Talk.
There we go. Sounds like me. We talked about biblical storytelling, and it was inspirational again as I was rewatching and listening to it again. Sometimes it's good to go back and rewatch. Oh, there we go. Go back and rewatch things. So Hollywood and biblical storytelling, that is up over there on the Table Talk channel right now. And we had a few technical problems during the show, but nonetheless, what Cameron was talking about, started talking about good and evil and storytelling and the biblical epics and story structure and things like that. And that means that I need to get, I think I should definitely take the Trial of St. Gabriel I've been working on and turn it not only into a short story as it is now, but a script. Good morning. Good morning, Sable. Good morning. Oh, Phaser says, hey there, Heath. My uncle says, thanks for the link. I actually just talked him out of his writing cave into sitting right here beside me. Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Yes. Cameron is so classy, man. The way he just picked up and ran to save the stream. Very cool move. Yeah. Actually, later in that stream, my power went out. So my power went out. And so Cameron's there for the end of it by himself. Oh, Sable says, I love how unapologetically confrontational the tone of this book is. Anyway, so that's all. It's like a drill instructor. Oh, this is going to be fun. I haven't gotten into it yet. So anyway, if you are interested in stories and storytelling, we talk about a lot about that over on the Table Talk channel. We've been putting clips out every day as well of the discussions. So please do. I put the link there. Please come over there to the Table Talk channel. Check out links and check out the clips and everything that's going on over there. All right, let's do our morning ritual here. I want to say that yesterday I'm feeling so much better because I finally got my car done. I know I've been talking about that on the stream. I finally got my car back yesterday. I mean, it's been a month and a half, I think. So I actually went out to a local grill. Nothing fancy, but a local sport. The first thing I did was went to the local grill and got a hamburger after I got my car. Because I have, with one exception, which is when my cousin picked me up to go to the art show at the first of this month, I have not left the house or been further from my house than I can walk. And so I walked the 3 miles to the auto repair store yesterday, got the car, and then went out. So I'm feeling so much better because of that. So yes, so that made me feel better. I've got to, so next up, so then I dove into the Discord server and all of that. I've been catching up because I just feel so much better. All right, let's do our morning ritual. First, we need to do our reading of From the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. Everybody got your drink? I have some Coke Zero this morning. Didn't make coffee. Was just feeling Coke Zero this morning. So everybody, get your coffee, whatever drink it is you have with you. Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of work done. But I was beginning to go a little bit stir crazy. And so I was probably suffering some mental health from that. So, yeah, I mean, I wrote the story. I wrote the Trial of St. Gabriel. I did all kinds of things here at the house. It's amazing how much I can do just here from the house. But now I need to be able to get out. And it was a great hamburger because I hadn't had one in a while. All right. So everybody, 2 deep breaths, deep inhales, complete exhales, and then take a sip of your favorite beverage. Everybody together. It will improve your life. It really will. So here we go. And One sip. That's good. That's good. That's good. All right. So now we've been reading from The War of Art. The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. Inspiration, fighting resistance. Resistance is everything that keeps you from being everything that you should be as a person, and especially stopping your creative endeavors. So, You Inc. When I first moved to Los Angeles and made the acquaintance of working screenwriters, I learned that many had their own corporations. They provided their writing services not as themselves, but as loan-outs from their one-man businesses. Their writing contracts were FSO, for services of themselves. I had never seen this before. I thought it was pretty cool. For a writer to incorporate himself has certain tax and financial advantages, but what I love about it is the metaphor. I like the idea of myself Inc. That way I can wear two hats. I can hire myself and fire myself. I can even, as Robin Williams once remarked of writer-producers, blow smoke up my own ass. Making yourself a corporation, or just thinking of yourself that way, reinforces the idea of professionalism, because it separates the artist doing the work from the will and consciousness running the show. No matter how much abuse is heaped upon the head of the former, the latter takes it in stride and keeps on trucking. Conversely, with success, the writer may well get a swelled head, but you, the boss, remember how to take yourself down a peg. Have you ever worked in an office? Then you know about Monday morning status meetings. The group assembles in the conference room, and the boss goes over the assignments, which team member is responsible for the coming week. When the meeting breaks up, an assistant prepares the worksheet and distributes it. When this hits your desk an hour later, you know exactly what you have to do for that week. I have one of those meetings with myself every Monday. I sit down and go over my assignments. Then I type it up and distribute it to myself. I have a corporate stationery and corporate business cards and a corporate checkbook. I write off corporate expenses and pay corporate taxes. I have different credit cards for myself and my corporation. If we think of ourselves as a corporation, we give a healthy distance on ourselves. We're less subjective. We don't take blows as personally. We're cold-blooded and can price our wares more realistically. Sometimes, as Joe Blow himself, I am too mild-mannered to go out and sell. But as Joe Blow Inc., I can pimp the hell out of myself. I'm not myself anymore. I'm me Inc. I'm a pro. All right. Yes, that can be an important part. That was more business than others. But very important. And of course, yeah, I mean, I've done that. Lots of people do that. It can be a hassle, but worth it. All right. I have got Kindle Classic up here. Let me bring this down. And bring up Stomping Kittens, and let's find out what it's all about. Hey, Brent. I'm glad to see you now. That mental health for mental fish, that phrase should be Heath's Geekverse t-shirt. You know, I have t-shirt designs. Some of you, and Brianna designed them, actually. Brianna designed them for the cultists. When I was trying to look for a way to monetize the cultists, which I'm having some new ideas on. But one of the things that we did was create t-shirts, and Brianna sometimes wears them on the stream, and you'll see me wearing them too sometimes, because we got a few of them made. But we actually had a disaster with the printer. The printer that I sent them to, they weren't print on demand. We were actually having them printed, screen printed, and man, they did a terrible job. Now, the owner actually ended up refunding all the money that I spent on them because they were printed so badly. I don't know what happened. So the owner said, gave me an excuse and then refunded my money. But that really hurt in the early days, the cultist, that we had Brianna cultist themed shirts, and then the printer completely botched them. Maybe that's something we could bring out again. Brent says, I haven't been able to attend the morning grind in a while. Missed the sip and breathe. I'm glad you're here today. Good morning, JDM. Good morning. And BGD. Good morning. Lots of people coming in. Peace and long life. Yes. Incorporate yourself. All right. Stomping Kittens, a Punching Babies sequel. Let's see what this is all about. Now, I have not read Punching Babies. Okay. The opening test. Let's just go through some of the start here, because for some reason, at least I don't often use this version on my computer. I can't get a table of contents. For some reason, there's no table of contents. So I'm not even sure what's coming. So we're just going to start the beginning and then see how far we get and see what this is about. So the opening test. So what's with the title? Can I make this larger on this? You'd think you'd be able to zoom, right? This says it's Kindle Classic, so I might all right. On that search. All right. Well, I guess what I got. Maybe I'm not using the most technically sophisticated Kindle reader. The opening test. So what's with the title? Stomping Kittens is the sequel to my critically acclaimed teaching manual for writers called Punching Babies, a how-to guide. And as Punching Babies is my personal take on the metaphor, it's as easy as stealing candy from a baby. So too is Stomping Kittens, the continuation of its plotting education in much further depth, and thus titled because we can't imagine anything easier than punching a whiny baby in its stupid face, other than stomping a newborn kitten. Can you tell I'm a dog person yet? Point being, this manual teaches us how to make the often frustrating process of plotting and writing your first novel, specifically fantasy, so a lot of us, that's exactly what a lot of us are into here, as easy as stomping kittens. If this reference offends your precious whittle social justice whiner fee wings, then I suggest you run home and dye your hair blue while crying about microaggressions that don't exist in your enabling parents, who obviously didn't prepare you for what someone else calls living in the real world. I guess this is the part that James was talking about. Oh, wait, Phaser Wrist says, well, okay, so wait a minute. So T Public. See, maybe I should look at that. T Public. Let me make note of that, because I do have look at. They'll literally put anything on a shirt and allow you to sell the ones you own the design rights to. Maybe I should. I thought about that. I've been doing more print on demand anyway lately, so maybe print on demand shirts work. Phaser Wrist says, by the way, my uncle is so happy you're covering his book that he says he's making all the rest of his plot books on his Write Club series free for digital download on Amazon all day tomorrow, just for you. Well, thank you. So I guess that means in his Write Club series. Hang on, I'll look that up. All right. I want to be able to find them and put links out to it. Write Club. Part of the Write Club series, 5 books. Oh, okay. So hold on. Let's find out what that is so everybody knows. I have to change over the screen sharing. So these will be up tomorrow. I can post a link to this in the Discord tomorrow. Okay, so I found it. So if you look up Write Club series on Amazon, Write Club series, 5 books. So here we are, 5 books in the series. Stomping Kittens, a Punching Baby sequel. Punching Babies, a how-to guide. Pen the Sword, the universal plot skeleton of every story ever told. This sounds like exactly the kind of things we study here and on Table Talk. On Writing Well, the club series. And Steal This Story, How to Write Great Fiction with One Stolen Sentence. Adron, you should be on Table Talk. We should interview you on Table Talk. You can find me on social media, or you can email me as well. I was looking to contact you, but you can email me if you go to the About link on this YouTube channel. You can see my email address. Click and get my email address. If you email me, I've been looking for new guests on Table Talk. They're on the way. Oh, Sable said that. Sable said that. Yes. Sorry about that. So thank you. Thank you very much. All right, let me go back over to Kindle. I'm not thrilled with this reading software. Okay. If you wish to close this book without reading any further and go around bashing it simply because you view its title as offensive, regardless of the enlightening material within, then by all means cut your pierced nose off to spite your face while remaining the mediocre writer. However, if you wish to educate yourself and become a master plotter while ascending into successful authorship, then by all means keep reading it, and I will teach you how by cramming decades of tutelage into hours of reading, thus providing once again that college is a complete waste of time and money for 99% of those who are brainwashed into attending. Stomping Kittens doesn't care about your feelings. This is all. Do you know Drake? This is written in the style of Drake. I mean, it's not it as far as the very blunt, forthright style. It reminds me of the dynamic story creation by Drake. And I love this book. So it's got the same type of straightforward style. Stomping Kittens doesn't care about your feelings or what you want to hear to sate your fragile little egos while pandering to your identity politics for worthless virtue points. It cares about telling you what you need to hear so you can transcend mediocrity, both personal and professional, to become a better writer. So if the title offends you, I offer two options. One, get over it, or two, choose another career. Because publishing your work is tantamount to handing your novel over to potential millions of readers while asking them to judge it as well. The one who wrote it judge it as well as the one who wrote it with an unbiased scrutiny. And if your delicate psyche can't handle something so innocuous as this book's title, then you certainly won't survive any form of public criticism. If you've kept reading, then congratulations. You've passed your first test as a writer, proving you might well have what it takes to handle scrutiny once you publish your book. If not, then, well, you were never going to make it as an author to begin with, because you can't please all of the people all the time, and trying to do so only leads to failure. Writers are artists because writing is an art form, and the reason art exists is to provoke emotion, to cause someone to feel something, anything. If someone is offended by your work, then take satisfaction in knowing that's a good indication that you've done your job well, because your art has caused an emotional response, which is the entire point of its existence. Apathy is the absolute last response you want as a writer, because it's the sure sign of bad, boring, and predictable writing. Also, movies are just visual stories, and we both watch the same movie. And if we both watch the same movie, we can imagine the same events, because the movies are far more objective than their subjective novel counterparts, which is why I reference tons of movies throughout the book and over novels as plot point examples. Yes, we often talk about the movies here too. But also, we have talked about, I think several books that we have looked at have talked about, well, there's the physical aspect of your story, and then there's the immaterial aspect of your story. And that immaterial aspect is about connecting with your audience on an emotional level. That's what your story is actually about. Hey, Charlie. Okay, fantastic, fantastic. Turning pages is weird, not being able to scroll and recenter in it. Yeah, so there must be better Kindle software or something. I haven't looked at it. Hey, Charlie. I just don't use Kindle on my Mac. I actually just don't use Kindle very much. I don't use Kindle on my Mac at all until now. Rule 1, art must evoke an emotional response. So apathy... Okay, yeah. Apathy is the absolute last response you want as a writer, because it's a sure sign of bad, boring, and predictable writing. I like that. Oh, I can highlight in here. Even if they hate it, that's better than apathy, right? So why this book exists. Books on plot have irritated me for years, because most of them are filled with nothing more than useless metaphorical bullshit that helps keep you writing Jack squat, and Jack left town. They promise you plenty of plot, then give you heaps of flowery filler courtesy of the artsy-fartsy author's masturbating ego, while advising obscure little ditties such as discover your story's big idea, then make it meaningful, or to sit down and have dinner while interviewing your protagonist, or light some candles and incense, then meditate to your favorite music while allowing your muse to speak to you, or to pretend you're an archaeologist at a dig site while writing you're unearthing your story's bones. I hope these are examples of actual from actual books. I think I've heard the sit down and have dinner while interviewing someone. Good morning, Stray. Good morning. Welcome, welcome, welcome. If you're lucky, and maybe if you're lucky, the golden goose they provide you with is their trite version of hundreds of years of old plot skeleton every writer worth the salt of their type sweating already knows. Always something along the lines of inciting incident, plot turn 1, pinch point 1, midpoint, pinch point 2, plot turn 2, resolution. Yes, it's what I do. Exactly. Before leaving you with an inane lesson they believe makes them sound sagacious, like it's not about finding your voice, it's about your voice finding you. As their parting pearl of wisdom, after which you realize you've just been swindled, as well as you've learned nothing even remotely applicable to your writing on top of having wasted money buying another damn dust collector for your bookshelf you won't leaf through twice. Pretending I'm an archaeologist at a dig site, unearthing my story's bones? Really? What the actual fuck? You don't do any of that crap. How does any of that crap help you find your protagonist's dominant character flaw when they must replace it with its opposite virtue in order to overcome the antagonist during the climax? Or explain what a midpoint reversal really means and how the death stakes established by the inciting incident need to raise the midpoint to ensure the protagonist's full commitment against the antagonist. Or tell you the difference between the pinch point that divides Act 2A and punch point that divides Act 2B. Looks like we're using Act 2A and Act 2B. Brianna and I do that all the time. So we got Act 2, but we were calling it Part 1 and Part 2, but separating Act 2 into 2 parts. Which is not exactly, which, you know, some people would just say, well, why not just say 4 act? But that's really helped us as well. And how both are reminders of the central conflict to keep your story focused from straying too far into subplots. Or how to establish protagonist empathy on page 1 and why your story needs to start with, otherwise we won't care when the inciting incident happens. Or how the physical crossing is the linchpin that holds Act 1 and Act 2 together, the same way as the spiritual crossing is the linchpin that holds Act 2 and 3 together. That's interesting. Physical crossing, that's, I guess, going into the other world between Act 1 and Act 2. I haven't seen this before. Spiritual crossing is what's going on between Act 2 and Act 3. Or why a triumphant protagonist automatically gives you a tragic antagonist and vice versa. Now, that's interesting too. How a triumphant protagonist automatically gives you a tragic antagonist. Or how the protagonist's decision, well, I'm going to say, highlight spiritual crossing as well over here. How this protagonist's decision during the Rubicon decides the entire plot of your story for you and why it's the most crucial moment you need to write everything else around. The decision during the crossing of the Rubicon. I'm sure we will get to what exactly that point is. Or why without a solid flaw or versus virtue argument, your story is nothing more than a random collection of events that presents zero character growth. And without it, the only real thing they have in common is that they happen to the same person. It doesn't. Because most books on plot offer you only vague advice that's about as useful for plotting and writing your novel as a wet wattle cobweb is for wiping your butt after a night of chugging skunk beer at a midnight run to Taco Bell. This is not that book. Stomping Kittens will teach you everything you need to know about essential plotting basics, explain multiple plot formulas and their necessary plot points in detail, advise how and why to apply them to your story and characters, and basically guide you by the hand through the writing your first fantasy novel from scratch to finish and chapter by chapter. So maybe everyone should read this in the next 2 days if you're trying to do something if you're trying to get ready before NaNoWriMo when you're writing fantasy. Because I don't deal in bullshit. I don't waste people's time, because what I hate most is having my time wasted. If this is your first foray into the wonderful wonders of plotting, then consider Stomping Kittens your initiation into my writer's club, my Write Club. So knuckle up and prepare for 30 years of writing and plotting know-how to punch you in the face and leave you gasping for more. Now, will Stomping Kittens teach you how to not how to only write a fantasy novel? Of course not. But everyone needs to start somewhere, and I'm using the term fantasy as a catch-all for the action, adventure, and romance genres, all nestled up inside the classic hero's journey with a bit of science fiction and superhero genres thrown in for taste to cover multiple bases. Plus, I like to think that I know a thing or two about a thing or two when it comes to fantasy writing. See the highlighting and note taking is what I use to use the software for. The notes actually create bookmarks that jump to the page when you click the note. Oh, I guess that's over here because it's sticking that over here. Phaser Rift says physical crossing is the protagonist half crossing to resolve the central conflict. Act 1 to Act 2. The spiritual crossing is the protagonist inspired last try against the antagonists, Act 2 to 3. So this is explicitly founded in the hero's journey. I wonder what he'd say about the heroine's labyrinth. I don't know. And thank you. Yes. If you thank you, Stray, for reminding me. If you if you have not got a copy of Goodnight Sword, until next Wednesday, I've got Goodnight Sword on Indiegogo. So Stray posted the link. Thank you so much, Stray, for reminding me. So hardback copies of Goodnight Sword, which is, of course, my take on Goodnight Moon, but it is my medieval fantasy take on Goodnight Moon. I have hard copies here. So if you are a lover of fantasy and you've got children in your life who are about the right age for Goodnight Moon, hey, they should be reading Goodnight Sword. So that's going to be Wednesday. We'll probably do some kind of live stream with it as it closes out on Wednesday. But if you get a pledge in by Wednesday, then it will be ready in time for Christmas. Okay. For the sake of insulting example, okay, all right, let's go for an insulting example. Imagine this teaching manual as a coloring book that I've handed you along with a box of crayons. Use my suggestions to color your first fantasy novel as directed while staying inside the lines. And then once you have some writing experience under your belt, you can color outside those lines to your writerly heart's content by switching plot points around and administering other stories changes to future novels of various other genres. Until then, stay in the lines. And also, by the way, please do hit the like button. Yeah, well, Stray's on top of it again. Please remember to hit the like button, because if you're here and you hit the like button, YouTube will know you're interested, so it will push this stream out to other people who are subscribed to the channel, but YouTube may not be showing this stream in their feeds. So that is very important to help other people who might want to be here and wish they were here, but they just don't know about it. So hit the like button to help push out this stream. This manual mainly covers the typical triumphant protagonist hero's journey, not so much the tragic protagonist or the anti-hero protagonist. The latter two are touched upon here and there throughout, but our main focus is the triumphant protagonist because they're the most common and, well, they are the easiest to write. Also understand that many variations of plot formulas and plot points exist. The example listed herein are not the only ones by any means. They're just the typical plot points for you to use as reference and to help you write your first fantasy novel in the easiest and most productive way possible. And don't fret about memorizing or writing down any of the charts and along the reading way, because at the end I repeat them for you while putting it all together. I've rehashed several of my writing articles in this book because they contain necessary explanations pertinent to the information involved. So if you're familiar with or have already read them, I suggest either rereading them to brush up or just skipping over them. You'll also find I repeat myself throughout this book, and that's because I want to hammer those particular points into your brain. People learn best through imitation and repetition. Otherwise, the phrase practice makes perfect wouldn't exist as true. So the necessary basics. James says he's correct. Learning the rules is not just committing them to memory. It's writing the rules within the rules until you are intimately familiar with them, then you can break them. That seems to be the case with all things. To be good, know the rules and follow them. To be great, then you know when they should be broken. The necessary basics. Before we get into the nitty-gritty that is your first fantasy novel chapter-by-chapter blueprint formula, let me explain some necessary basics, because the most important nugget of knowledge and every budding writer needs to understand is that every story is about change. So we got change here. The most important nugget of knowledge every budding writer needs to understand is that every story is about change. And you present this change through this adversity because adversity builds character. And the only way to overcome adversity is to face it, which in turn provides your story the necessary element of conflict. Whoa. Because without conflict, there is no story, just a random collection of meaningless events. It may surprise you to learn that you can strip 99% of everything away from your story: the events, scenes, situations, car chases, bomb explosions, etc., because all of that is interesting but nonetheless window dressing, and what you have left is the foundation of your story, its true meaning and purpose, its flaw versus virtue argument. The true meaning and purpose is the flaw versus virtue argument. The real story you're telling, which this is the real story you're telling, which everything else is built upon. Then you put on the, Stray says, well, you need to know the rules in order to break them. Yes. Know the story, then you can dress it up in a cool fantasy or science fiction world or whatever it is you want to do after that. That's the physical part. Then that's when I think about that, I think about Drake, that, well, we can tell the same story, which I think is the kind of the idea here, the true meaning and purpose, flaw versus virtue, which is a human connection, which is connecting with the audience, but we could tell the same story through science fiction, through fantasy, through a bunch of different worlds. This is the real story you're telling in which everything else is built upon. And when you do get your flaw versus, where do you get your flaw versus virtue argument from your protagonist? It may also surprise you to learn that you can strip 99% of everything away from your protagonist: their age, race, and gender, because none of that matters yet. And what you have left are the three most essential character traits: their wound, shield, and sword, or their scar, their dominant character flaw, and its opposite virtue. So this is the three most essential character traits. I can also see in the software that, like, I'm highlighting it as I go, but I suppose if you were trying to get a chunk, you should highlight all that together. But that's okay. I just want the visual. So the three most essential character traits: their wound, their shield, and their sword. All right, this is interesting. Oh, Sable says their wound, shield, and sword. I love that. I've never heard it put so concisely. That's fantastic. Okay, right there, Sable says, I'm all in on this book right there. I'm reading it all this weekend. Their wound, their flaw, or their scar, their dominant character flaw, and it's opposite the virtue. All right, so let's go on. The wound is, well, God. Okay, the wound is a traumatic event, or more typically a past traumatic. We're probably going to start incorporating, I can see wound, shield, and sword being incorporated into our story analysis terminology from here on out. Oh, Phaser Wrist says, flaw versus virtue argument example. Rocky's dominant character flaw is insecurity. Its opposite virtue is confidence. He wants everyone to respect him, but he needs to learn to respect himself first. Yeah, Rocky, I figure, is in Rocky Balboa. Yeah. The wound is a traumatic event, or more typically a past traumatic event. I think that's when we were looking at the story, the screenwriter's Bible. in the backstory. We thought that was interesting from the backstory perspective. There in the screenwriter's Bible, that was talking about the backstory from like one. You don't need 1,000 pages of backstory. Backstory is this one significant event that happened to the character in the past that's going forward. That's meaningful in the story going forward. So this might be similar here. The wound is a traumatic event, or more typically a past traumatic event that has emotionally, psychologically, and sometimes also physically scarred the protagonist. Everyone has wounds because you cannot live without accruing them. Well, hold on. I'm going to admit that too. So the wound is a traumatic event. Everyone has wound. This also, and sometimes physically scarring the protagonist. And from this wound, you get their shield or their dominant character flaw. Okay, so the shield is the flaw. Okay, so from the wound, you get the shield. This shield is what they carry around and hide behind because they believe, at least on a subconscious level, because most people aren't consciously aware of their dominant character flaw. Otherwise, we would work to correct it. That it protects them from ever being wounded in that way or any similar kind of way again. Think of it as their defense mechanism to every situation you put them in. This is immediately applicable to what I am working with as far as plotting out this Rabavania movie and then book. Because I was like, I noticed that I was very weak on the character's flaw as I was plotting this out yesterday. Or working on it yesterday. This is a very evocative way, James says, to describe important character traits. BGD says, oh, good. I thought you were going to talk about Bullwinkle's dominant flaw next. Okay. And from the shield, we get their sword. Okay, so the wound, the backstory wound, generates their flaw, and the flaw is what they are using to cover their wound to keep them from being hurt in that way ever again. I like that. And from this shield, we get their sword. Actually, I'm getting now what my protagonist's shield should be based on the wound. I'm getting it now. That's immediately being pressed into use. And from, oh, God, I hate this software. And from this shield, we get their sword, or its opposite virtue. The sword is the panacea that provides the possibility to alleviate the protagonist from the burden of their dominant character flaw and eventually achieve their full potential through character growth. It doesn't guarantee it, mind, but it does provide the possibility. So this is the sword, the opposite virtue. The possibility, the sword is the possibility, the panacea that provides the possibility to alleviate the protagonist from the burden of their dominant character flaw and eventually achieve their full potential through character growth. Now, when I say opposite virtue, that doesn't mean the sword will be the flaw's exact opposite virtue. It needs only to be an opposite virtue, all depending on your particular protagonist and their particular story. As a rudimentary example, if we have both a protagonist whose shield is hate, your protagonist's sword might be love, whereas mine might be compassion or empathy, both varying degrees of love. Again, the virtue doesn't have to be the exact opposite of the flaw, only an opposite. We can start with the opposite. We can just start with the opposite as our origin point and then go from there. Yeah, you can see that you might get really bogged down in struggling to come up with exactly what is the opposite of one particular flaw, or to be its virtue or something. And you probably don't want that, but an opposite here. Phaser Wrist says your story is really about your protagonist's dominant character flaw and whether they eventually overcome or surrender to it. Then they are either rewarded or punished during the Act 3 climax. I like that. Yes, rewarded. Do they surrender to it? They overcome it or surrender. Most of the time, you're talking about overcoming it because that's a happy ending story. But if not, then it's a tragedy. But if they don't overcome it, right, they have to be punished because how do you tell a tragic story? The message of the story needs to be the same. So if the character fails to overcome, then they have to be punished, because then the message is the same to the audience. Like, what was the right choice and what was the wrong choice? James says this is precisely correct. Sable says, even just reading this simple intro is clarifying my own protagonist and why she appeared in my mind the way she did. Love it. Yes, this is immediately very... I love that it is immediately very useful. You're immediately... I'm probably going to have to get a hard copy of this, because I do tend to keep, my physical of the books that have helped me the most. I do like having them in physical copies and having them marked up on my desk here as I'm writing. So this one, I think, is definitely this one needs to be added to that. Phaser Wrist says, if the sword eventually alleviates the flaw, they are a triumphant protagonist. If the protagonist rejects the sword, they're a Oh, that's exactly what I was just saying before I got to this. Okay, so I did have it right. So that is the direction that we're going. If the sword eventually alleviates the flaw, they are a triumphant protagonist. If the protagonist rejects the sword, they are a tragic protagonist. I also need to tell Brianna about this. Brianna, she's at work right now, so she can't join us. But I'm definitely going to share this book with Brianna and tell her that she needs to get the Kindle edition. Sable says, "Oh, he's also saying in so many words that you need to go to your white hot center and confront all the stuff you don't want to confront to be a good writer." Yes. James says, this is all validation for my own NaNoWriMo characters. This is all commonly understood information, but it's laid out extremely clearly here. Yes, it is laid out very clearly here. Let's see. Now, when I say opposite virtue, okay, we just said that point. The best wounds, the best wounds come from the writer themselves, because this keeps your writing honest while injecting it with the passions of your personal painted experiences. So make a list of the worst, scariest, most traumatizing and traumatic, embarrassing situations you've ever been through. Now pick the most interesting one and apply it to your protagonist as the wound. Once you have their wound, scar, you can then figure out their shield, flaw, and their sword, virtue. Phaser Wrist says, the dominant character flaw provides the moral lesson of your story. Basically, the story says, if you are like my flawed protagonist and overcome or surrender to it, you'll be rewarded or punished. The dominant character flaw provides the moral lesson to your story. Basically, the story says, if you are like my flawed protagonist and overcome or surrender to it, you'll be rewarded or punished. Got it. Yes. Okay. James says, yes, write what you know, including your own scars. Yeah, that's the write what you know thing. It seems to be a controversial statement here, but in this case, like overall, you see people talking about debating that, I think, on different ways. But from this emotional level, because if you say write what you know and you go here to your own flaws, well, then you can, okay, and you want it to be, a movie or a book about rock climbers. I mean, maybe because it's like, oh, well, because some people take that phrase to be like, write what you know. That, well, like, I know, I'm not a rock climber, so I can't write about rock climbing or something. Hey, just 1 second. Yeah. I think, we'd been going only about an hour, but sometimes we'd gone up to 90 minutes. And I think I do need to go. This is going to be a 90-minute, morning grind. I forgot the name of my show, but I do need to refill my drink and take just a break for just a second, because I want to be sure we stay with this for about another 40 minutes. So give me just a moment. I'll be right back. Okay, so Yeti hug break, everybody.
Oh, it's time for a Yeti hug break. Yeti hug break, Yeti hug break. Everybody go hug yo Yeti and show yo Yeti some love.
Okay. Sorry, I'm back. Thank you for staying with me. This is really great stuff. So, want to be in here for the long haul. Let's see. So James Bacon says, Phaserist, I'm super thankful that you found this channel and decided to spend some time with us. I am too. You've been this has been a huge contribution to the channel and the discussion that we've had quite a bit here and also on the Table Talk channel. I'll say again, if you go to the Table Talk channel, I should post a link to that again. But if you're watching on replay or you find this discussion later, on an ongoing subject on the Table Talk channel is writing structure and story analysis. James says, write what you know is conditional advice. At work, I write what I don't know all the time, and it doesn't mean that you can't hedge what you don't know with what you do. Writers can't know everything. That's why they do research. Oh, Phaser Wrist says, my uncle says, thank you guys for being interested in his books. Thank him for writing them. James Bacon says, saying write what you know is shorthand for saying put forth the effort to learn what you don't know and be sure to draw from that to apply to this new understanding. It's punchy and already insightful. Very glad you managed to find us. Oh, really? Also, we seem to see the neat thing about this is that this whole channel is this attracted such an interesting group of people who are all interested in the same things. Also, Hero Quest. My uncle's the one who got me into Hero Quest. We love Hero Quest around here. He actually just bought me the base game and all of his expansions for my birthday a couple of weeks ago and played it with me when I'm not too sick. Well, we love Hero Quest. We love Hero Quest. I've got another channel. If you, the channel Dinner and a Board Game, we did a 3D Hero Quest board and we put Hero Quest. We did games of Hero Quest. And happy birthday, yes. Stray says, one can research what it is to be hurt by throwing oneself down a hill. It's different when you are pushed down one. Brent says, I take it as writing what you know from the emotional context, which I think is what we're talking about here. Not literal knowledge, but your own trauma-informed experience and reactions. I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, I like that. Okay. The three are so interconnected, and we're talking about the wound, the shield, and the sword. The scar, the flaw, and the virtue. The three are so interconnected, you might as well consider them as one unit, because if you know one, then you can discover the other two with ease. Once you know your protagonist's wound, shield, and sword, their story practically writes itself because all scenes in it must be connected in one way, must be connected to one of these three essential character traits in some way. For example, as with the triumphant protagonist, Act 1, the flawed protagonist lives behind their shield out of habitual practice because of the wound. Okay. Act 1, the flawed protagonist lives behind their shield out of habitual practice because of their wound. Act 2A, the blossoming protagonist learns of their sword while considering the scary possibility of living without their shield as their wound mends slowly. Act 2B, the regressing protagonist retreats behind their shield because they endure more wounds worse than before, and now they recognize their shield for the heavy burden it truly is, usually because it causes great harm to someone they care about. Act 3, the changed protagonist casts their flawed shield aside and raises their virtuous sword while embracing their full potential while providing its worth against the antagonist. Act 2A, so the blossoming protagonist learns of their sword while considering the scary possibility of living without their shield as their wounds mend slowly. Act 2B, the regressing protagonist retreats behind their shield because they endure more wounds worse than before. And now, well, whatever. Forget the highlighting. recognize their wounds worse than before. Now they recognize their shield for the heavy burden it truly is. And then Act 3, usually because it causes great harm to someone they've come to care about, the changed protagonist casts their flawed shield aside and raises their virtuous sword while embracing their full potential, then proving its worth against the antagonist. Or to simplify the focus, James says this is exquisitely validating. Or to simplify focus, Act 1, shield. Act 2, shield versus sword. Act 3, sword. Change is a scary process, but also a necessary part of life, which is why it forms the foundation of the greatest stories ever told, as well as creates the best protagonists. As I've said, the three traits go hand in hand because they are linked. The wound is the reason for the shield, and the sword is the panacea virtue of the shield's flaw. Common reoccurring wound, scar, equals shield flaw versus sword virtue arguments exist through all of the staple genres, such as, but not limited to, horror. Phobia equals fear versus courage. Superhero loss equals doubt. So loss is the wound. Shield, doubt versus faith. Romance, betrayal, fear versus love. And sometimes the flaw versus virtue argument is character role specific, as with the typical selfishness versus selflessness anti-hero. But don't think of the wound, shield, and sword are restricted to genres, because they apply to every story of every genre, and they differ depending on the individual writer and their particular protagonist. For example, let us say you and I both start our protagonist with the same wound of loss. This does not mean they must have a shield of doubt and a sword of faith, as in the previous example with the superhero. Loss can be anything, and we each deal with it in our own personal and private ways. I'll stricken my protagonist with loss of having survived the terrorist bombing attack that killed her parents during a county fair, then burden them with the shield of anxiety in the form of agoraphobia, fear of public spaces, through crippling panic attacks, and their sword will be courage, so they can eventually overcome their agoraphobia to hunt down the terrorist organization responsible for their parents' murder. Sounds like Star Trek 6? The change piece, I mean. Wound of loss. Sable is scribbling notes. Whereas you might stricken your protagonist with the loss of their children to disease. I'm once again thinking about these things are universal. So loss, like, can you connect with the story? Well, you often do this with a human universal. So something like loss being something that everybody experiences, at some time. So every human should be able to connect with this idea of loss. The particulars of it, whether loss due to the terrorist bombing, the parents in the terrorist bombing, or children due to disease, those are particularly different instantiations. We might not individually be able to exactly know exactly what that's like, because that might not happen to us. But the underlying theme of loss is something that we are all connecting with. Oh, God. Okay, maybe they're religious and you burden them with a shield of resentment, so they blame God because of it and are jealous that their atheist friends' children are still alive and well. Then you give them the sword of forgiveness, so they can eventually restore their Christian faith while regaining compassion for their fellow man despite the opposing beliefs involved. See, two completely different stories and two completely different flaw versus virtue arguments, though both stem from the same wound of loss. I love this a lot. Because in basic terms and regardless the fiction genre, the wound provides an emotional detriment, the shield an insecurity because of it, and the sword a panacea to the shield. The possibilities are endless, limited only by your imagination. And to simplify, when everything else of lesser value is stripped away, Act 1 exists to introduce your flaw versus virtue argument. Act 2 exists to present and debate your flaw versus virtue argument. Act 3 exists to reward or punish the verdict of your flaw versus virtue argument. Phaser Risk says the setup of Act 1 is all about enabling circumstances which the protagonist lives because of their dominant character flaw. The inciting incident comes to challenge those enabling circumstances, putting their dominant character flaw into question. So that setup of Act 1 is all about the enabling circumstances in which the protagonist lives because of their dominant character flaw. The inciting incident comes to challenge those enabling circumstances, putting the dominant character flaw into question. All right. I like that too. This is your scarred protagonist character growth arc in a nutshell, which provides necessary change, whether positive or negative. And once it's complete, their story is finished, at least for your first novel. Though if you plan a sequel, then most times the protagonist's wound in the sequel is something traumatic or tragic that is experienced or carried over from the previous novel into the second, usually via the all is lost or the all is gone again events of Act 2B or Act 3, respectively. That's great information, too. When do you stop the story? First of all, when do you stop the story? Once you've been through your character arc, your story is finished. Once it's complete, your story is finished. Okay, now how do you go on? Well, if you plan a sequel, then you bring up, use something from the first book as the wound to go into the second. The shield wound, the shield sword dynamic should tie directly into what they want versus what they need. The shield is what they want. The sword is what they need. Yes. And this is going to also, because if they get what they, in that situational setup, the want versus need, if they get what they want, that's often the tragedy. If they get what they need, then that's the happy ending. The sword is what they need, so that's what they've got to develop. Phaser Wrist says that's why Blake Snyder calls the setup of Act 1 stasis equals death, because of the enabling circumstances which allow the dominant character flaw to fester unchallenged. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves just yet. Back to the flaw versus virtue argument. Imagine a zigzagging line of progression with its origin in Act 1. Slowly, it continues through the rest of Act 1 and throughout all of Act 2, zigzagging up and down with increasing intensity, while its peaks and valleys become more pronounced through its continuing progression. Each ascending peak represents an event or scene or situation where virtue is proven over flaw, as well as it shows the reward and consequences for doing so. Each descending valley represents an event or scene or situation where flaw is proven over virtue, as well as it shows the reward and consequences for doing so. If you don't want to only show the reward for virtue over flaw, and only the consequence for flaw over virtue, because that presents a one-sided lecture. You want to show the reward and consequences for both, because that maintains unpredictability in your story while keeping the reader guessing as to which one is going to eventually win out. Flaw or virtue? This is like faith versus technology in Star Wars. You've got places where some of them that go both ways. You've got some scenes where one is up, where faith is up. You've got other scenes where technology is up. And then Luke is trying to decide between faith and technology. And so not every scene shows him that the Force is the answer, that the faith is the answer, because sometimes technology is up, like when the Death Star blows up Alderaan. So, yes, you can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want, but you can't always, but if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. Yes. I get it now. Yes. I'll always note that the zigzagging line of progression is not a true zigzag. I only use it for the sake of imaginary example. which means you don't want every even event proving virtue over flaw and every odd event proving flaw over virtue, because that is predictable. Your zigzag line of progression might be virtue, virtue, flaw, 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 virtue, flaw, virtue, etc. Or any combination of those depending on your particular story and your particular protagonist. That zigzag line of progression will eventually come to a head and halt at the end of Act 2, during which I call the Rubicon, also referred to as the spiritual crossing because it's the physical crossing on steroids. More on this later, which is the linchpin that holds Act 2B and Act 3 together, same as the physical crossing is the linchpin that holds Act 1 and Act 2 together. The Rubicon is the most crucial moment in your story because that's where the protagonist, after enduring all of the adversity you've put them through, finally makes their defining decision to choose virtue over flaw or the flaw magnified over virtue. And this is the end of Act. This is at the end of Act 2, which I call the Rubicon. Once that design decision is made, whichever they choose becomes their dominant character trait for the rest of the story. That is Act 3. Also understand that change is never instant. So after their defining moment of decision, they don't suddenly go gung-ho with their virtue over flaw or their flaw magnified over virtue. Instead, they have to set themselves upon that particular path, which finalizes their change through the process of proof. Before we continue, I need to explain two important things. Determined by the inciting incident, every protagonist seeks one of three goals as their main outward desire. Possession of something, relief from something, revenge for something. Determined by the inciting incidents, every protagonist seeks one of three goals as their main outward desire. Possession of something, relief from something, revenge for something. But don't think this applies only to the protagonist, because it also applies to every other character in your story. As well, there is only one plot that exists in all of fiction. A hero goes on a journey, or there is only one plot that exists in all of fiction. A hero goes on a journey, or a stranger comes to town. I think Sable is still having revelations here. Now, I know what you're thinking. That looks like two plots. Wrong. This is Sable Phoenix. I was thinking about this in terms of the dynamic between the hero's journey and the heroine's labyrinth as well. Sable says, this is why at first you thought the heroine's labyrinth was just the hero's journey from a different perspective. Because that plot has those two things. The same story told from opposite viewpoints. Awesome. Now, I know what you're thinking. That just hit me with the weight of the epiphany. I thought we were having revelations over here. Now, I know what you're thinking. That looks like two plots. Wrong, because a hero goes on a journey is just a stranger comes to town told from a different protagonist point of view and vice versa. That's it. And from the singular plot theory, those exist two versions, the triumphant protagonist and the tragic protagonist. This is where the plot comes into play and why I call the Rubicon, aka the spiritual crossing, the most crucial moment in your story, because it determines everything else about your story. During the Rubicon, if your protagonist chooses virtue over flaw, then they are a triumphant protagonist. Yes, so if they choose virtue over flaw, they are the triumphant protagonist. Luke Skywalker chooses faith over technology and becomes triumphant. If they choose flaw magnified over virtue, then they are a tragic protagonist. If Luke Skywalker had chosen technology instead of faith, he would be tragic because he would have failed to destroy the Death Star, and Yavin would have been blown up. and that would have been the end of the rebellion. I say flaw magnified because up to the Rubicon, the protagonist has been burdened by their flaw, and once the decision is made, it needs to become magnified past that point for emphasis. The Rubicon is also important because it determines the plot points of your entire story. If your protagonist chooses virtue over flaw during the Rubicon, this gives them an all is joy. If the protagonist chooses virtue over flaw during the Rubicon, this gives them an all is joy of a false victory midpoint, which divides Act 2 in half, making it Act 2A and Act 2B. Act 2A becomes more successful. Act 2A becomes more successes than failures toward resolving the story's central conflict. Think 2 steps forward and 1 step back, leading up to the all is joy of the false victory midpoint. So this is the mirror thing. We talked about that. I think from some other location before we saw this, that it was saying the midpoint needs to be a mirror, the opposite of what your finale is going to be. Stray says 3 books: Hero's Journey, Heroine's Labyrinth, and You're Not From Around Here Yet. You're not from around here, are you? Sable says, I'm actually getting excited in a jittery way, like a hard to sit still way. This is shaking up a bunch of things. And when they all settle, I have a feeling I will have the outline of Mac's whole series. Mac is the name of my protagonist. You know, I think that when you... I like those moments. And it seems, like I said, every time I have a hard time writing something, it's because my structure isn't down. And it's like, well, I can't write because I don't know what to write. I sit down, I really don't know what to write. And it's always a structural thing. So once you've got the structure and you know what the story is, then yeah, I can, it's said in here, it starts to write itself. Okay, but I want to read this again right up here. So if your protagonist is going to choose virtue over flaw at the Rubicon, so this is the crossing from Act 2 into 3. This gives them an all is joy of a false victory midpoint, which divides Act 2 in half, making it Act 2A and Act 2B. Act 2A becomes more successes than failures. Okay, so Act 2 then needs to be more successes than failures toward resolving the story's central conflict. Think 2 steps forward and then 1 step back, leading up to the all is joy of the false victory at midpoint. Since Act 2A and Act 2B are opposites, this makes Act 2B more failures than successes toward resolving the story's central conflict. Think 1 step forward and 2 steps back, leading them down to all is lost of the false defeat anchor point, which takes place before the Rubicon that ends at 2B. Triumphant protagonist is false victory midpoint, false defeat anchor point, virtue over flaw Rubicon, true victory climax. Oh, Phaser Risk says, don't forget, Heath, the book has an extremely detailed plot skeleton further on if you want to skip ahead later and then show it because of the time constraints. Maybe I should do that. I got about 15 minutes left. Let's see. Well, I tell you what, let's just keep going as we are, so that we get everything as we're going here. And then it sounds like everybody will finish reading this book at the end. At the end of this, everybody will go download this book and start reading it. To change your triumphant protagonist into a tragic protagonist, who instead chooses their flaw, magnified over virtue during their Rubicon, All you need to do is switch to Act 2A and Act 2B, which inverts them. Now Act 2A becomes more failures than successes toward resolving the story's central conflict, leading to an all is lost of the false defeat midpoint. And Act 2B becomes more successes than failures toward resolving the story's central conflict, leading up to the all is joy, false victory, anchor point, which takes place before the Rubicon that ends Act 2B. So the tragic protagonist is false defeat midpoint, false defeat midpoint, false victory anchor point, flaw magnified over virtue Rubicon, true defeat climax. James says we should review Orson Scott's cards, characters, and viewpoints. The mice quotient is particularly revelatory. Even if we don't review it here, I'd recommend reading it. It's ubiquitous in fantasy authorship. Since the climax of Act 3 and the midpoint of Act 2 parallel one another, they don't mirror each other like in Act 2A and Act 2B. Since the climax of Act 3 and the midpoint of Act 2 parallel each other. So this actually says that since the climax of Act 3 and midpoint of Act 2 parallel each other, they don't mirror each other like Act 2A and Act 2B. This means a triumphant protagonist with a false victory midpoint has a true victory climax. Okay, actually, I think that's better. Okay, so that's slightly different from what I had been saying. But this is how I understood it before people were talking about mirroring them. So this is saying the climax of Act 3 and the midpoint of Act 2 parallel each other. If you had asked me a couple of weeks ago if that was the case, I would have said yes. That the climax, your climax and your midpoint are in parallel. So wait a minute, I'm a little bit confused on that here. Because going back to classic Star Wars, Luke is successful by blowing up the Death Star. He is also successful in rescuing Princess Leia. So the midpoint of this movie, we're rescuing Princess Leia. He has successes in both of those. And a tragic protagonist with a false defeat midpoint has a true defeat climax. The easiest way to remember this is the climax is just the midpoint on steroids. Same as the spiritual crossing is just the physical crossing on steroids. Right, double down on flaw like Darth Vader. So that's how we should have done the tragic story of Darth Vader, to tell the fall. If you're trying to tell the fall, which is we've talked about a lot on the Table Talk channel, how that should have been set up. Since the midpoint and climax mirror the anchor point between them, Phaser Risk says the climax is just the midpoint on steroids. So a false victory midpoint equals a true victory climax. A false defeat midpoint equals a true defeat climax. Yeah, so I've got that. That's the way I was going and what I was writing. I said this is a happy ending story. We've got true victory like you're talking about here. I like that. And so he was also going to have success at the midpoint. Oh, characters and viewpoints also pairs very well with Adron's statements here. Sable says the biggest reason the prequel sequel trilogy doesn't land as well as the original trilogy is that George got too enamored with his world and didn't stick to the character framework. Since the midpoint and character mirror the anchor point between them because they're opposites, a false victory midpoint and thus a true victory climax gives you a false defeat anchor point and a false defeat midpoint. And thus a true defeat climax gives you a false victory anchor point. Triumphant protagonist. Act 1, inciting incident. 2, physical crossing. Act 2, false victory midpoint, false defeat anchor point. Spiritual crossing, virtue over flaw Rubicon. Act 3, moment of regression. 7, true victory climax. Or if you're doing the tragic protagonist, Act 1, inciting incident. 2, physical crossing. 3, false defeat midpoint. False victory anchor point. 5, spiritual crossing. Flaw magnified over virtue Rubicon. Act 3, moment of regression. True defeat climax. Take note, during the physical crossing, the protagonist achieves half commitment to resolving the story's central conflict. During the midpoint, they achieve full commitment. And during the spiritual crossing, the Rubicon, they achieve absolute commitment. So we got half commitment, full commitment, and then absolute commitment. Also note that both charts possess a moment of regression before the climax. And this represents one last chance for the protagonist, whether triumphant or tragic, to renege on their flaw versus virtue commitment. But it is also a flaw and fleeting moment. But it's also a false and fleeting moment that they disregard in seconds while proving their determined decision as irrevocable dedication. This moment of regression symbolizes a final glimmer of their flaw, triumphant protagonist, or virtue for a tragic protagonist, and its destruction into despair as they take dominance while competing their growth arc. When they forge forward into the climax of Act 3, that there's either the ultimate reward or ultimate punishment, having chosen flaw magnified over virtue because of it. Good morning, PH. I'm glad you're here. This is, if you like storytelling and story structure, this is a fantastic one. We've been having all kinds of revelations over here, so good to see you. We should have had Anakin's story being the inverse of Luke's. Yeah, it should have been if the prequels were going to be the fall of Anakin Skywalker, it needed to be very much about his character. But that's not what we got. We got the fall of the Roman Empire, sort of, kind of, in space. I know. I like it. Can be said he may have gone too far in some places. Let's see. A few more minutes here. So, the moment of regression symbolizes a final glimmer of... Oh, we said that. So, do you now see why I call the Rubicon, or spiritual crossing, the most crucial moment in your story? Because once you discover your protagonist's flaw versus virtue argument, then determine which one they choose during the Rubicon, your story practically plots itself. I hate this software. Okay. I like that. Okay. So that's the most crucial moment of the story. And as I said, I'm having problems with that because I realized I know my all hope is lost moment. So I know that moment. And I had incorrectly identified that at the end of the story, but Cameron helped me realize that no, that's actually the all hope is lost. What's going on when all hope is lost? So now I got to have Act 3 because there's something else going on that I didn't know because it's actually perfect for that moment. So after this moment, I'm about to have him cross the Rubicon. It's because of this all hope is lost, or right after this all hope is lost, what's happening right there, that this is a happy ending story, that he needs to choose his virtue and then be able to complete whatever this third part of the story is. And here's the real kicker. If you have a triumphant protagonist, then you automatically have a tragic antagonist and vice versa, because in order for one to succeed, the other must fail. This is why it's so important for you to remember how to develop both plot lines, triumphant and tragic, of the singular plot, hero and stranger, because if your protagonist point of view is also a hero goes on a journey, then your antagonist point of view is automatically a stranger comes to town and vice versa. And herein, we're going to focus mainly on the triumphant protagonist hero versus tragic antagonist villain for several reasons. 1. Most stories are centered on a triumphant protagonist because most readers enjoy stories about the underdog who strives and struggles against insurmountable odds and then eventually overcomes them. These are the most popular stories and comprise about 90% of successful novels and movies because of it. Not that tragic protagonist stories aren't great, because they can be and plenty are, but they also require more skill to write, as well as a lot of people don't enjoy them as much because of their depressing tragic endings. A lot of people say exactly that. This is also why most books on plot focus on the triumphant protagonist without ever mentioning the tragic protagonist option, which in my opinion is a grave mistake and a sure reason to buy a better writing manual because, as stated before, a triumphant protagonist automatically gives you a tragic antagonist and vice versa. As well as the sole determinant whether your protagonist is triumphant or tragic is the defining characteristic they make during the crucial Rubicon, which is why everything else is written around it. 2, because the antagonist to a triumphant protagonist is just a tragic protagonist in disguise, it will teach you how to write a great tragic protagonist by writing a great antagonist to your triumphant protagonist, which is exactly what we are doing here. Brianna and I love The Fall, but we're doing the stories of the fall and we want to tell one, but we got to do the classic happy ending story first. PH says, I know he had to go, but I'll just answer here. As they may watch on replay. Hey, Heath, do you follow Matt Wolf? He has a website called Future Tools that is a hub for AI tools. Yesterday, he posted a video talking about Show One AI, which is another text-to-video tool. I do not. That sounds like something I need to do, though. Let me come over here and put that up in my notes or bring up another browser. Matt Wolf AI. We'll check that out. Thank you, Arbex. Yes, and this is available free digitally today and tomorrow on Amazon. It does plot itself. I've experienced this during my NaNoWriMo outlining. This is why change hit so hard in the Dresden Files, because it's the first, probably only novel where Harry's a tragic protagonist rather than triumphant. What about Donnie Darko? He's a tragic, triumphant protagonist. His tragedy isn't for rejecting the sword, though. It's emotionally tragic. Yeah, he wins, but at a cost. Okay. Let's see. This has been fantastic. So once again, okay, so what's going to happen, I've got several things to do today. I've got to finish that Kickstarter video. I got to finish this Kickstarter video. I got very, very, very close to answering all the messages on Discord and also in email. So I've been trying to go through Discord and email. I got to finish the Discord server. I got to finish the Kickstarter video, which is what I was planning on doing right after this. Dig in and get that done. Clean up email messages and Discord messages, and then just do nothing but jump into the plotting here. I'm tempted. It's really tempting right after this just to keep reading and keep going with the plotting. This has been so good. But on the other hand, I really need to structure the other day the other way. Hopefully it would be great if by like 5 or 6 o'clock, I could just completely turn off everything about the internet. What is today? Say Friday? It would be totally great if that should probably be my goal. Get everything else on my plate done in 6 hours so that by 5 o'clock tonight, all I can do is focus on plotting and going through this, reading more here. So yeah, let me bring this up because I really appreciate Phaser Wrist and his uncle. So first of all, he's written this fantastic book and he's giving it to us free right now. So if you've been enjoying this, he set it up. Let me stop the screen sharing because I want to make sure that I share this again right now. So I'm going to put this link again in the Discord server. This has been amazing. So right now, if we're on Amazon, Stomping Kittens. This is Stomping Kittens, a Punishing Babies sequel, part of the Right Club series. So if you go here, and it's on the Amazon, there's paperback too. I might pick up the paperback like directly. But the Kindle version right here that I was reading, I mean, this was provided free to us, so full disclosure there. But also click over here, click on Kindle today. Need to find it today. It's free, but this is definitely worth it. So I hope everybody, I'm going to should post this in the NaNoWriMo section of the Discord server as well. It is free today. Get it. Please go over there and check it out. All right. I guess I am out of here. So lots of work to do, lots of stuff to do. This has been fantastic. Again, thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. It looks like that link might not have gone through. Discord. Oh, thank you. Yes, there's the Discord link. So if you're here and you find us, please do join the Discord server. We would love to have you. All right, man, let's do stuff. I'm feeling good. Got a lot of energy today. This is fantastic. I enjoyed speaking to everybody as always. Go forth today. Be constructive, and be creative. Later.